Welcome to Midlife Matters. I'm Marie, and each week I'm joined by my friends Julie and Mindy to talk about all the topics keeping women in the middle years up at night. Listeners, before we start today's episode, we want to invite you to our upcoming meet and greet event. If you are in or near LaGrange, Georgia, we would love for you to join us. This fun morning will take place on September 27th from 9 to 11 a.m. For more details, please message us on Instagram at Midlife Matters Podcast or drop us an email at midlifematterspodcast@gmail.com. Hope to see you there. Now let's get started. Listeners, today we're starting a new book. And many of you know that we often read a chapter or two of a book, and then we do one episode a month that way until we've finished. And as always, you do not have to be reading the book in order to enjoy these episodes. As a matter of fact, I would say only a small percentage of people even do read the book, but we always, it's basically just a springboard for our discussion for the week. So a couple of the other books that we've done like this have been Happier at Home by Gretchen Rubin. We just did Happy School by Julie Gordon, and each of those took us about a year. I don't know if this one will take us a year or not, Julie. I didn't read ahead, but I have a feeling it's going to take us a few months. So, it gives us kind of something, one episode a month to focus on.
Right. And I was going to joke, this is the first book that we have done where it doesn't have happy in the title.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, I was trying to think if there had been any other books we'd done besides those two, and I feel like there might have been.
We've done like Scarlet Hiltebeitel, we did, but we were interviewing the authors.
Oh, true. Yeah. Okay.
And so there was, I'm sorry, I'm failing to remember the other ones that we've done, but we have done a few.
Well, this book does talk about joy and celebration, though. So I did feel like there was an underlying current of happiness in here.
Okay.
Love it, Julie.
Well,
Love
it. Good. All right. Well, this book is called What If It's Wonderful by Nicole Zasowski. And we don't even know if we have that correct, but it is Zasowski. And we're going to be discussing what we've learned from the first two chapters today and what changes we hope it will bring about in our lives. So really, we're just going to be kind of pulling snippets from this book, but we're kind of more going to be talking about how it applies to us. And Mindy, you just got done telling us what a deep book you felt like it is.
Yes. I mean, just today we're going to discuss the first two chapters, but I felt like there were multiple sentences that I could really just sit and meditate on and allow the Holy Spirit to teach me, convict me, show me how that applies to my own life. And it's funny because you guys said, well, which sentence was that? And I joked that there were like 50 of them. So it really is a deep book and also just very applicable and similar to our other books. I feel like we're going to take from it kind of what we put into it. What time we give it is kind of how much we're going to get from it.
Right. And the author, Nicole, is a licensed marriage and family therapist, author and speaker based in Connecticut, where she lives with her husband and 3 young children. And this book is about learning to release your fears, choose joy, and find the courage to celebrate in the midst of fear and disappointments. She challenges us to let go of the habits of practicing disappointment. That's funny. A habit of practicing disappointment.
Ouch.
Ouch.
To let go of that and fully embrace joy, beckoning you to ask yourself a new question. What if it's wonderful? So I really feel like even just that habit of practicing disappointment, that could take us a whole year.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, when you've been doing it a long time, that's a hard habit to break.
Right. So we've got a lot to talk about in this book. Julie, what is like going on in her life at the beginning when she starts out? Why don't you tell listeners where we are?
She's writing from a place of loss and grief. She and her husband had the heartache of losing 4 babies to miscarriage. And so their whole life, she felt like that pain touched every single part of her life. Their days were characterized by fertility doctor appointments, prayers of hope, prayers of lament, difficult decisions, phone calls, and just tearful conversations with friends. And she said she was very lonely, that she and her husband grieved differently. They had the same heartache, but they dealt with it differently. And that's kind of where this comes from, because she said she just had a hard time accepting any good news and anticipating anything good in the future because she was so focused on the experiences in her life of the past.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There was one sentence I underlined in this section. I just thought it was so, so good. She says, "We knew that God could, but also wondered if he would."
Mm-hmm.
And as a person of faith, I find myself at that precipice quite often. And so I appreciate her vulnerable writing here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And one day, after her doctor called her to tell her that her baby would not make it, she sat on the floor of her office and she called her friend and mentor, who during their conversation asked her a question that continues to be critical to her healing. And she asked this question to herself, and then she kind of asked this question of the reader. What has this cost you? What have life's pains and disappointments cost you? And when you guys think about that question, what comes to mind? At first, I don't even really want to think about it.
Right.
Well, I think in her, it gave her permission to acknowledge like all the other losses, kind of the ripple effect that the one main loss had caused. And, death of dreams and disappointments and things that went along with those losses. And I totally get that because I'm in a place where I'm experiencing a lot of disappointment and sadness, and I'm really kind of afraid to embrace anything good, like it might get snatched away, or how long will this last? Anything good. And you really miss out. You can miss out on a lot of good, happy times in the present if you're constantly dreading the future. And that's where I have been these last months and really trying to work out of that. This book has been really helpful because if you do live out worst case scenarios in your mind, that becomes your reality. That's where you live.
Mm-hmm.
I was just talking to a friend yesterday, and I can look back at a season in my life where I decided to put joy on the shelf and prepare for the worst. And those were the most unhappy, bitter, angry, unhealthy years of my life. I allowed that preparation of the worst, the expecting the worst, the kind of, being too afraid to hope. It stole so many things from me, and it changed who I was. I was an unhappy person. It stole relationships from me that could have been thriving. It stole my health because I began to run to other things to seek temporary comfort that would lie to me. It stole my health. It stole sleep. It stole relationships, and it stole any of the joys that I could have experienced during that time that I feel that I missed out. And so I am sad for that season of my life, but I'm so thankful the Lord allowed me to run from him and experience it, because I feel like this book is timely in that there's joy in every day. And so that joy and suffering going hand to hand is really hard to live in that balance.
Yeah, I like what the person that reviewed the book had said. What was it? That sadness and joy can coexist together, and that we can learn from both. Something that she said in the intro, which I don't know if you guys read the intro, but it really struck a chord with me. She said one of the biggest things she missed out on, other than, like you said, relationships, Mindy, and she missed out on the enduring joy of deepening her relationship with God, because she was distracted and expecting more thrill from earthly opportunities and gifts than they were meant to give. And that was one of those I had to stop on and think, okay, what is that? What is she saying there? Right. And I thought, we can be so focused on things going how we think they should go and what we want. But then, how long, if we had those, how long would even that make us happy? Right. And it's just a real mystery that I am discovering, that we don't seem to know God to the depths that we know him like we do when we're suffering. And while I would do anything to have John healthy and well and cancer free, I don't ever want to go back to the me before John got sick. And that's just a weird thing to say. I know. And I just have a different relationship with God than I did before. And there's just such a closeness. And that's just a weird position to be in, because I would do anything to change his situation, but I don't want to change mine.
Right.
You know, and what has happened to me and to my relationship with God through it.
This goes hand in hand, what you're saying, Julie. And I so appreciate this book following actually the book that we just finished with Julie Gordon, because one of the main things we talked about and have been trying to implement in our own lives is that we can't wait for circumstances to change to find joy. And this is, I feel like, coupled with that, helping us to further that pursuit.
I was trying to think of like what changes about ourselves, or like what we might see on the outside of what life's pains and disappointments create. And I was thinking about, they make me cynical, skeptical, controlling, less willing to take risks. Like there's a lot of things that we might even say that that's just part of our personality or something. But if we really delve deep, it probably stemmed from a pain or disappointment that we either may have acknowledged or may not.
Right. And when you're looking and you're seeing that, Marie, like I feel like when you're seeing the pain in your life, you start looking for pain from other people and you become unforgiving. You become harsh, and that leads into, being cynical. And so those everyday grievances, you can't just shake off because they become your armor. They become the badges that you wear.
And we could also look at other people maybe with a little bit more compassion, thinking about the fact that, well, if they're exhibiting these, it could come from pain or disappointment that we don't know anything about.
Yes. That simple phrase, hurt people, hurt people.
Right. No, that's true. Yeah. So there's a lot of things that we can think about what it does to us and then see how it might have done the same thing to other people. So this was a good exercise just to think about that one question: what does life's pain and disappointments cost you? But when life feels unsafe, emotionally or spiritually, what are some behaviors we use to shield us from getting hurt? And I know one of the first things I do is withdraw. Try to get away from that situation, that person. I'm going to leave before that person or that situation leaves me.
Yes.
And that's just control, trying to manage our emotions, because we're just not going to be vulnerable to anything. And what she says is, unfortunately, when you try to manage your emotions so that you're not vulnerable, you are also then kind of spared from the good emotions too. You're not just protecting yourself from the bad ones. You're also not going to be able to experience the good ones too. I know for me, this was a word we learned in the last book, catastrophizing. That's like, okay, if I prepare for the worst, then nothing can surprise me. I'm going to be ready, and you can't. You can't be ready. And unfortunately, what we think is preparing us is really making us less prepared, I think.
What do you mean by that, Julie?
Well, we're just not going to be in a good state. We're going to be in a place where if we're not celebrating the joys and the good things daily, we're missing out on all of that. And instead of being better, we're going to be bitter.
Right.
We're going to have isolated ourselves from friends who can help, who can encourage us. And it's kind of a spiral, I think.
Right. I thought one of the behaviors I know I exhibit when anything uncomfortable happens is I get really busy. I stuff. I don't want to think about that. And, I start kind of adding more noise into my day. I have noticed that I can tell when I'm healthier because I'm okay in silence. And
that's a good point.
That's kind of a good litmus test for me is, am I having to drown out my emotions with noise right now? Because if there is, then I'm really stuffing something.
Right. Yeah, she does talk about anesthetizing yourself with pleasures like Netflix, food,
Yes.
And don't we all do that to some extent?
Yes.
But I think it usually takes us a while to even notice that we're doing that.
Yes.
It's not like we turn it on or we get out that, chocolate cake and say, I'm going to anesthetize myself. We just do it without thinking,
I do without thinking, and I don't even care about it too. I'm like, if I realize it, right? The first thought is exactly. I'm like, yeah, I am doing that. Don't talk to me about it. I'm trying to comfort myself right now. Leave me alone.
And maybe a little of that is okay as long as it doesn't last, like a day of that or 2 days of that, that might be okay. It's how long you let it go on that's important.
Right.
True, Something else she said that I thought was kind of interesting. I had to reread this too. She said, like we've probably all said this, like, oh, it must be nice, like that these people are experiencing this and we're not. We can kind of become envious. And she said, if you think about it, that's really judgmental because what you're saying is you think you're more deserving than they are. And I was like, ouch, that's.
Or maybe that you think you're just as deserving. Maybe you don't want theirs to go away, but maybe you just want it too,
Right.
Yeah. I think it's not even so much about the other person. Maybe it's that you're upset that you don't have that too,
Yes.
Yeah. See, it's normal emotion.
I mean, being completely honest here, one of the things I really had to grieve, it was years long, was that I didn't live close to my mom and dad. And I know my mom, we talked about this. She grieved too when I first had Abby. That's 22 years ago. And we have never lived close with the kids growing up. Now 2 are out of the house. And we have both had to grieve that. And when I see other people and their grandparents, or the kids' grandparents are completely involved and they live near family, it must be nice. Like, why can't we have that? Why can't I have my mom? Why can't my kids go to grandma and grandpa's house a lot easier? And it just really, it hurt over years. And I had to not find myself in that place. I knew that was a place that was unhealthy for me.
Right. Yeah. I think we all have things that we think, well, it's like what Julie said before, like if we could just get this, but then how long would that make us happy? But we do see things that other people have that we just can't quite manage to have. And then we could drive ourselves nuts.
Yes.
Yeah, I just love what she said, expecting more thrill than they were ever meant to give.
Right.
I need to cross-stitch that somewhere.
Well, speaking of things that we feel, because we are talking about real emotions, she does talk about the difference between feelings being real and feelings being true. And how does understanding this impact how we reconcile the truth of God's promises with our pain? What did she say?
I think she's saying, that real feelings aren't necessarily true. They aren't always true.
Right.
I related to something at the end of the chapter. She mentioned like different scenarios of how pain had cost different people different things. And she said like this one person actually had physical pain, daily physical pain. And that left them feeling like they were kind of disqualified from living a full life. And I have felt that way since John's diagnosis. Like I've felt our limitations because we don't have the same social life. We don't have the same recreational life. We don't have the same, he hasn't worked, like everything about our life has changed. And it's all, we just feel very limited by his illness. And it makes me kind of question, like, well, what is our purpose then? Like what are we supposed to be doing?
Right.
Kind of goes back to that old phrase, like, if you don't have your health, you don't have anything. Well, really, it does really feel that way. That feels true. But I know as a Christian, like, no, that is not true. That is a true feeling that I have, but it is not truth. And it just goes back to like, well, where do I get my sense of identity and my purpose from? It's not in what I do. It's not in my accomplishments. It's not in how perfect things are done,
Right.
This is more about finding joy in the moment daily with John, with our kids, and just in very simple things, because all the to-dos aren't there right now. Just a deepening walk with the Lord and intimacy with Him is so much greater than a lot of those things that we used to put so much value on. And that's just hard to understand until you're there. It really is.
Looking back at the seasons of suffering, something that I noticed is that the suffering that God allowed at different times in my life, similar to you, Julie, it changed who I am. It, like, for good, it changed who I am. I am not currently in a season of suffering. I would not choose to go back to those seasons of suffering, but it changed my identity. My miscarriages changed my identity as a mom. I knew I could not control anything about having a baby, how long I had the baby, how long my children would be in my home. I could not control their life.
Mm-hmm.
That was purely of God. And it took me a good 5 years to get to a point of surrender, of finding my identity as being a mom. And God changed my mind about that. And I had to realize they were His children. Well, with Bryce's job situations and all of our moving, that really hit another piece of my identity, of my home, and also of finding my identity in Bryce's job. And that very much was stripped away. And so every time, these are things I hold dearly. I love having a home, being a mother, and my husband's job were like foundational to who I was.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So when those things went away, I was like, who am I?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not who I thought I was. This isn't what I thought. This isn't what brings me joy. And it was hard to figure out how to find joy, though I didn't know who I was. It felt so unfamiliar. The territory was very unfamiliar. And being on now the other side of it, I wouldn't trade that for the world, because it has changed who I am. It's changed my marriage in a way that is truly remarkable. And just my outlook on life is much more day to day. Like you mentioned, Julie, I cannot control the future, but I'm not waiting for the other shoe to drop either. Like, I know I'm going to go into another season of suffering at some point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But I'm joyful right now and long for the closeness of Christ when you're in the suffering.
It's just prepared you to find joy in whatever's going on that day.
Yes.
Wherever you are.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And when I think about this question, I think, well, I'm gonna feel that pain. And sometimes I even want to tell myself all the reasons why I'm justified and say how I'm really feeling about that. But sometimes in doing that, we see that we're ascribing wrong motives to the pain. We're creating this warped story around it. We're telling ourselves a lie. It's kind of like in our last book, Happy School, where she said that we need to reframe it. And for me, it kind of helps me to acknowledge how I'm really feeling and say how I really think this pain came about. And then as I say it, I think, well, that's not really totally true. It's really not all that person's fault, or it's probably, you know what I'm saying? But
yeah.
But sometimes we need to just look at it face on and even just acknowledge what we're telling ourselves about it. And then I think we hear that still small voice of God saying, now, is that really true? Or, is that, do you really believe that, Marie? Or maybe a friend says, well, I don't know if that's really true, but I think it's normal and human to really feel and think that those feelings are true. I don't know that I can always just immediately recognize that my true feelings are not actually true.
Yeah, and I don't think that's what she's asking us to. I think it is just that the feelings are real and need to be felt, but not to believe them as truth. Like you work through those.
Right.
Something she said is hope doesn't deny the cost. It honors the painful reality, but it doesn't fall to fear. Like, I just think it's not believing those feelings as absolute truth. I can feel very alone. Well, I'm not alone, or that God is absent. No, The truth
Right.
is he's here and he's present. And this world and this life is not even what God intended. Like he didn't cause my pain, but I can let my feelings take me down that path,
Right.
to doubt God.
Yeah.
But then knowing what his word says and claiming those truths are how I kind of counter that and not act on those feelings. I think it's not acting on the feelings that's the difference.
Yes. Well, and it's maybe how you act. I know when I look back at the seasons of suffering, it wasn't the circumstances that I was suffering. And I've actually now, I think the wisdom of it is that I was suffering because I was running away from God. He longed to comfort me in those times of suffering. And I was pushing him out at arm's length. And I think what was happening is I did not see God for who he was. And I did not see myself for who I really was. And so each time I had to learn who he was and his character, and that he is loving, he is kind. And so to be able to rest in that, we live in a sinful world, but he is a good and loving God. Something that made a difference to me in a season of suffering. I've mentioned this so many times, but I'm going to mention it again. The Tim Keller podcast, his series on suffering, he says the difference in suffering for the Christian is, and I'm paraphrasing, the difference for the Christian is not that we don't go through painful or difficult seasons of suffering. It's what you do when you're in it. It's that you continue to talk to God about it while you're in it. And so that's the person that he can comfort. We're telling God how we feel instead of blaming him for it, if that makes sense. So we just continue. We are angry. And I was angry at God. And the difference now is that I'm angry and I tell him, and he can comfort me through my pain. Just like my husband, I love him. And I tell him when he makes me mad. Right? That is the intimacy that I felt like grew through the seasons of suffering, is that I realize I can tell God when I feel like he makes me mad. When he allows something that I truly despise. But it's in the continuing to talk to him and tell him about your pain that he can meet us.
Yeah, that's really good.
Well, she tells a story in the book about Zelophehad, again, a name that I do not know how to pronounce, and her 5 daughters, which this is a very small story in the Old Testament. I actually don't even know if I'd really ever heard it before.
In Numbers 27, the 5 daughters of Zelophehad.
Oh, Zelophehad. Okay, there we go.
So the dad died, and as it was customary in those days that all the inheritance went to the sons. Well, he only had 5 daughters. So they were very fearful that they were going to lose all their inheritance. And that was even the law. But, and so they were terrified because back then women had no provision. I don't even think they were allowed to work. They just had to beg and be taken care of by someone else. So they got the courage up to approach the leaders, and Moses heard their case, and he took it before God and appealed to God, hey, these women are seeking justice because they are going to lose their inheritance. And God actually heard Moses and changed the law. And so because they chose faith in God over fear based on their own circumstances, it changed their situation for the better and actually changed the law for everyone, coming after them. And so she points out, that what they would have missed out on had they only acted on their fear.
Right.
Right, because at the end of that paragraph, she says, what was my dread costing me? What was I missing out on as I acted on my fear instead of my faith? And doesn't it take us a long time, a lot of times? I feel like a lot of times we do get around to acting on faith, but we're super slow about it. And in the meantime, we suffer all this anxiety and dread and just
sleepless
knots in
nights.
the pit of our stomach and sleepless nights and all this. And then we finally move on what we know we should do. And then there's such a sense of relief.
Right.
I don't know why we can't just move a little faster.
Well, at the beginning of this year, sometimes a lot of years I'll pick a word that kind of is going to define my year. And the word this year was possibility. And that made me think about that again, because what I can see is not all there is. And it's so easy to just, what is on your own horizon is all you think is possible. Because you can't see how this could ever work or ever be fixed. And there's been so many times God's brought gifts into our lives this year that I just could have never seen it working out that way, So if I'm only focusing on what I can see, what I can imagine, what I think are the answers, I'm just going to be living in constant fear. And I just need to be more open to possibility, because I can't see it all. And it is more delightful when it happens, because it's like, oh, okay, that's how God was going to work that out,
Right. It's a surprise gift.
And the more our dreams fall away that are broken, and you see new dreams coming to light that you didn't even realize you had, the more I realize my eyes get really tired when I'm looking out for my own interest. And if I can just rest in the Father's arms and know that He cares for me and leave it right there, I don't know what my future holds. I could have never seen myself right here, right now, and so I realized that He does have a plan. I can rest in it.
All right, well, let's move on to chapter 2, which is broken toys. Julie, do you want to catch us up as to where we are?
Yeah, like we said, that Nicole is a therapist, and she had gone to a retreat in kind of a training session with other therapists. And she said a lot of times they'll practice techniques and on each other, and they were somehow using metaphors to describe people's lives. And and she had told her story about all of her loss, and one of the other therapists said, I don't really know you well, but I can't shake a metaphor that I keep thinking about as I reflect on the story of your loss, particularly your loss around miscarriage, and how unsafe it has felt for you to hope and to celebrate. And his metaphor or picture of her life was kind of that of a little girl on Christmas morning with all these beautiful gifts wrapped around her. And she was anticipating opening them and being excited for what was inside the boxes. And when she opened them, the toys were broken. And, she obviously felt grateful for the gift and loved it, but just felt really heartbroken that she wasn't going to be able to play with it or use it the way she thought she would. And so she realized that the, quote, broken toys of her life were the unmet expectations, the disappointments, and the grief that was characterizing this whole season of her life. So that's where the title Broken Toys comes from. And she's asked us to kind of look at our broken toys in life.
Like, how can our broken toys, our pain, be an avenue of growth or grace?
I might have already talked about this from another episode, but it's just been on my mind so much. The verse in James, consider it pure joy when you experience various trials. Just kind of always hated that verse. I just didn't understand it. Like, well, what is joyful? How can I ever pretend that something horrible is joyful?
Right.
And I don't think that's what he's asking us to do. He's asking us to take a longer view of suffering and to see, to intentionally look in the future at what all of this might produce in me. And James says it'll produce perseverance, maturity, and completeness, but only if you let it. Like, it's not a guarantee that suffering is going to make you a better person. It's not. It could make you bitter,
worse, right?
Bitter or better, And there's nothing good or joyful in the pain itself. I mean, God hates it. Like, this is not His original plan, and He weeps with us. But I love my new understanding of Romans 8:28, because that's another verse that often seems like a platitude when people are suffering and they say that all good things work out for the good of those who love the Lord. Like, nobody wants to hear that when they're in the middle of something. But this is Tim Keller's paraphrase of that verse. He said, if I will trust God and hold on to Him in the suffering, He can work things out so that the suffering acts like a furnace that refines and purifies me. So it's not that he's working the cancer out for good. Cancer is never good. Or the miscarriage. None of those things are good. It's more about it's the transformation he's going to do in you. I love Romans 8:28 now because he talks about suffering being kind of like a furnace, that old analogy you hear in scripture. I think it's from the Greek word, like suffering is like intense heat that they put metal into, and then the dross or the impurities rise to the top, and then you're just left with the pure metal, the pure gold. Mm-hmm. And Tim Keller says, don't you want to go through suffering and be pure gold at the end? And it's like, yes, I want to be pure gold, and that's a choice that we make. Because there's no guarantee that we will if we don't want to be.
Oh, goodness. I have so many thoughts around this. And I loved that she brings up Peter's life and in John, where he is restored after denying Christ. And then I love that she brings up Jesus and that he literally wears scars on his body from the suffering that he had to go through on our behalf. And so to be able to relate with my Savior in that way brings comfort, because I feel that he can understand now when I take anything to him. He will understand because he understands to death what suffering can do. The other thought is she wrote this one sentence, and this has been true for my life, and I love that she said it on a more practical daily basis. She writes, my story has provided a welcome mat for others to share their own experiences too. I feel that we relate with others in our suffering more sometimes than we can relate with them in our joys and celebrations. And I have found this to be true because, as I mentioned, it changing my identity, changing who I am, it has created a compassion in me, especially when I see someone with a similar type of suffering that I've been through. And instead of offering empty platitude, I can offer compassion and a listening ear, and I can sit with them in it. And it makes you available, it makes you genuine, sincere, and it gives that other person a safe place to be.
Yeah, I was thinking about that too, Mindy. Like, we can draw near to God, but we can also draw more near to other people and gain comfort from what they've experienced, and then also comfort others from what we've experienced. So I think that it works both ways. Well, have you guys had painful experiences that have complicated your relationship with joy and celebration? I think we'd all say yes here.
Yeah.
And sometimes we may not even have a clear idea of when it was, but she did say that most people can recall a moment, person, or circumstance that complicated our relationship with celebration.
I mean, like you said, Marie, I think we all have these experiences, but I remember once when our son was going through a medical issue, and that was really the first thing that we faced where we kind of felt totally out of control. Kind of like you, Minnie, with the miscarriages, like you just realize, okay, there's nothing we can do to change this or fix this. And it felt like it impacted every area of our life. It just had a big ripple effect. And it's hard to celebrate when your child is suffering, or I kind of walked around feeling like, when is the other shoe going to drop? That's how I remember that time period. Like, if this could happen, anything could happen. And it's like that with John's cancer too. Like, well, if this could happen, anything could happen.
Right. There were two situations that also touched my identity as a mom. When my son Nathan was 3, he literally tried to die 2 times. Like, clearly, when we lived in Nashville, my neighbor saw him waving at her through our 3rd-story window from her house next door. He was in nap time. I just laid him down, And there were 3 stories above this aggregate driveway in the back of the house. And she happened to be sitting in her living room and saw Nathan waving at her. He had gotten the window open at 3 and was waving. And she came to the door and she was frantic. And I thought, that happened so fast, I had no control. He could have died. And it shook me. We went on vacation that year to the beach. And long story short, he left our family to go look for a Frisbee at our hotel room that was across the street. In a second, he was gone. And Bryce and I are looking all around. The people next to us told us that they thought they saw him go into the water. And I'm looking from my child's body in the water. For it was an hour and a half. I had to describe Nathan, what he was wearing, what he looked like. We couldn't find him. I was devastated in that moment. I realized like all it was horrible. And he just walked across the street looking for a Frisbee. They found him in a hotel lobby. They radioed us. And those 2 instances happen almost back to back. And you would think that would make me a nervous wreck. But it changed me. I surrendered him. And I surrendered all of my kids because God clearly showed me he could have died. He could have been hit by a car. He could have fell out of the 3rd-story window. And I couldn't do anything. Again, I was powerless to save him. I was powerless in those situations. And I had to release my children. And so in those situations, it actually relieved me of the control. And it gave me joy. And I thought, well, doggone it. I'm going to enjoy these kids while I have them because I do not know how long I'm going to have them.
Yeah. I still remember when you told me that story about when you were on vacation. I mean, it was horrifying.
It was. It still horrifies me. On his birthday, y'all, every year, I praise God I still have him.
Yeah.
I think back. It changed. Right. It literally, it just impressioned on my heart.
Yeah.
That makes me think of something she said on page 17. It said, I now have a different relationship with God than I did before. There's an intimacy between the 2 of us that's been forged from heartache. I no longer see his blessings as a reward given on the other side of a good performance. I think she talks about that a lot. Like the only reason to celebrate is for an accomplishment or a performance or a victory. But she now sees his gifts as a reflection of his goodness and grace instead of a prize for my own goodness and grit. I think that kind of goes along with what you just said there.
Oh, Julie, I underlined that, all of that. Thank you for bringing that up.
Well, do we only look for God or do we only see God in our difficulties? How do we picture him in our joys? I do think that we definitely tend to run to God more during difficulties, but do we picture him in our joys, like cheering and celebrating along with us?
I don't think I did. I think that's what this book is desiring to teach, because people, I don't think that comes as easily, or even that we've been taught that.
Yes.
That God wants to celebrate with us as much as he wants to be with us in pain. But, you think there's verses that say, delight in the Lord, and all that is possible with him. And, one of the fruits of the Spirit is joy and peace. And those come, those are ways to celebrate God's goodness and his gifts that don't have anything to do with us.
Yes. I remember sitting at church with you guys in Brentwood, and it was the season that I decided to play my flute again, which was very short-lived. But I was sitting next to Delinia, and I don't know what happened that morning, but I remember this moment so well, because we had a moment together sitting up in the orchestra. And we were singing, and this is not just Judson, but this was, I feel like, characterizes a lot of situations maybe during our worship time at church, that I looked at Delaney, I was like, all these songs are about having a hard time. I'm like, when do we celebrate? And she responded, she's like, you're right. I feel like all the songs, it's people are going through hard things. And yes, there are those times where, yes, I need that song to surrender and remind myself, like, it's tough. It's hard. The road is hard. God is good. But how about for the person that's celebrating? How about for the person that's praising? Like, can we go in? And this is where I'm like, maybe I need to go to a Pentecostal church and like, but there's a time, there's a season, I think, to couple praise, adoration, celebration, joy with the surrender and with the coupling of, yes, this is a hard season, but there's so much relief and surrender in praise. Mm-hmm. And I love that she brought this up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, one of the things that she talks about in the books, and maybe this is one of the reasons why we hesitate to do more praising or celebrating, Mindy, is because there are reasons that we tend to hang on to pain. And she talks about some that can really kind of, I don't know, feel uncomfortable because you might be doing them. So why might we be hanging on to pain simply because it's familiar or comfortable? And she says one of the reasons is that you might enjoy the feeling of being considered strong and brave, or you might think that your pain is the most interesting thing about you. Or can you be authentic and able to relate to others without it? Expecting heartache takes away the element of surprise. No one enjoys grief, but I know what to do about it. Did you guys relate to any of these reasons of hanging on to pain simply because it's familiar or comfortable?
Well, I did think that she's writing this afterwards. You know, she's come through the season of pain.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And so I thought, okay, she has a little bit different perspective. I'm kind of in the middle of something, so I can't imagine ever wanting to hang on to it right now. Mm-hmm. But I think for me, probably the expecting heartache takes away the element of surprise. That might be in the future the hardest one for me to give up because I think, well, this, like I said before, this happens, so who knows what else could happen. You know, I can see that would be something I might struggle with. Just not ever wanting to be surprised again by something traumatic. You know?
Yeah.
So I get that one. Yeah.
This is a less deep reason, but I could relate to this. She says that playing with something that's already broken feels safer than feeling afraid to love something that might break. And this is going to sound superficial, but maybe there are people out there that can relate. I have a 2007 minivan. It is banged up. It is gross, but I don't care what happens to that thing. And my husband has said, Marie, let's go car shopping. Like, go out anytime you want and pick something, you know, within reason, you know, but like, you don't have to keep this car. Like, and he's said that for a couple of years now. And I just keep on holding on. And I even went out and looked recently. And the reason I don't want to get one, and it just really, really sounds superficial, but it's true for my personality, is I don't want to get the new car and then have something happen to it and have to feel bad about it. It's comforting to have the old car that I don't have to feel bad about. Can you guys relate to that at all?
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's preventing me from doing something that should be a joy.
Yes. I was contemplating that, Marie. I totally relate with that. And then I realized the more I thought about things, life is always leading to death. And I'm sorry that went deep really fast. But what I mean is, even when I take a shower in the morning, I'm all clean and fresh. The rest of the day, I'm getting dirty. I'm getting dirtier. I get smelly. My hair gets dirty. And I'm never able to hold on to that perfection of when I'm first clean.
Right.
It's always going imperfect.
Yeah.
Always. And so I'm like, every situation, like our bodies are aging, you know, we cannot hold on to anything perfect.
Right.
Yeah. And that's why, you know, after you get that first dent, you can relax.
But I do think that this happens in superficial and in deeper ways. Like we would almost rather have the broken thing so that we don't have to feel the disappointment when the new and better thing that we've been thinking would make our life so wonderful breaks or doesn't work, or we're unhappy.
Right. So we're all familiar with that. So what are you missing out on then? You're missing out on the joy of a new car, the new car smell. The fact that you can get in the car and not worry about breaking down to visit your child on the way to college. Like, you know, like I'm missing out on the fact that I don't know, you know, what state my car is in. Like my car could go at any time. I don't want to be stranded by the side of the road. Like I don't want to
have those. I love it when I get in somebody else's new car, but I don't know. I haven't been able to pull the trigger on that. So I don't know. It was kind of convicting. I guess these things were convicting to me because this isn't the only situation that we do that in, but I think it's relatable to a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
It is.
This one, I couldn't really relate, but I thought this one was interesting. Do you have anything to say about your pain is the most interesting thing about you?
Yeah, I thought about it was interesting when she said your pain is the most interesting thing about you, perhaps, and that if that's what you've talked about for years, that might be hard to give up. Like, who are you? You know, I hear that a lot from people that maybe were caregivers. Once that's gone, they just don't even know who they are and what to talk about and how to relate. Like, that's how you related to everybody was through that pain. So I would imagine that would be a big adjustment period to learn how to relate in a positive, joyful way to things, you know?
Right. And I do love going along with that. How can we be authentic and still have joy? Because I know sometimes joy and gratitude can seem, and she says, inauthentic, and we can seem, you know, I say we because I do try to be joyful and have gratitude, especially right now. Like I said, that's where I am. But I think though that there is a balance in calling the pain what it is and also offering hope that is difficult but necessary. Like, people are looking for hope and we're afraid to have it. And that just comes through praying for the right words at the right time, because we're not always ready for hope or ready for joy. You know, that's a process. And so I even mentioned, you know, there was a good 4-5 years that I had to learn to be ready for that. That was hard. I was not ready for it for years in other seasons. And so I don't know. I think that as we're interacting with our friends, and you know, we each have different sufferings, but being able to relate in suffering and provide joy is only of the Holy Spirit. I mean, to still be an authentic, genuine, comforting friend.
Yeah, right after she talks about would my joy feel inauthentic, she said, did others find it easier to love me with my pile of broken toys? And you know, we all talk about the struggle is real, and I think that's kind of a buzzword now, is people wanting to be authentic. But like you said, Mindy, I think there's true. We need to be true to what's going on, but not just leave it there. Like, I don't want to be authentic and just say, here's my big mess, look at me, and just get stuck there and not do the right thing with it, you know? Like, it's almost kind of a badge of honor now to just be a mess.
Right.
And I don't think that's necessarily the point of being authentic. It's to say, this is where I am, but this is my hope. This is where I want to be. Not just reveling in the look at the big mess I am.
Yes.
That seems to be a kind of a a thing now, is to just you know, expose your mess, but then leave it there.
Right. Well, at the end of this chapter, she's on a flight after having taken a test in the airport bathroom, and she looks down at the test, balancing on her knee, and she sees 2 pink lines. Does she dare to celebrate? And I think it's interesting. Most people don't take a pregnancy test in the airport bathroom. I would probably say very few people do. But the background is that I think when we've been disappointed so many times, like, she doesn't want to use the morning urine, wake up. Like, she doesn't want to even do it the best way. The best way on the back of the package, at least it used to be like, you know, get all your stuff spread out on the bathroom counter, you know, set your timer, like, go through all these steps. She is doing it in like, kind of like, I'm just going to close my eyes and point kind of way, because I've been disappointed so many times. I'm going to almost do it in a way that's sure to end up in disappointment. I'll do it wrong. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think she's probably done this so many times.
Yeah,
this isn't like the, you know, maybe we took 4, 5, 6 of these. You know, she's probably done hundreds. And she even said, is it even wise to take it without my husband nearby? Like I might need his, comfort or whatever. And she said, it's probably pretty foolish. But on the other hand, my expectations were low and it was something to do.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, she said she was expecting a no anyway. So,
right. So I don't know. The last line of the chapter is, does she dare to celebrate? I don't know. I think she's probably she's celebrating maybe with a lot of trepidation. Like she's probably celebrated before. Well, we know she has and been disappointed. So even if she can be happy today, she doesn't know if she'll still be happy 3 weeks from now. Like,
yes.
Yeah. Will it be snatched away is what she's.
I totally lived that. And my whole pregnancy with Jacob was after miscarriages. And I had no joy with my pregnancy with Jacob. I was afraid the entire time. And when he was born, I finally got to hold him in my arms. I never thought I'd see him. I just thought I was angry at God, and I thought God was going to take him. And when he was born, Bryce commented weeks later, he said, "You're so happy to get up in the middle of the night." I said, "I'm so happy to have this child." I just never thought I'd see him. But it and that leads into just the recovery of my view of God. But it's you're afraid to hope. You're afraid to be joyful.
Right. Well, I think a lot of people can relate to that, and I guess you'll have to tune in next month when we talk about the next chapter to find out if she really does celebrate. But listeners, we hope that if you're interested in this book and if you're interested in reading along with us this year, we hope that you'll pick up What If It's Wonderful by Nicole Zasowski. We've got to find out how you say that, but it is Zasowski. And so we highly recommend you order it on Amazon or pick it up at your local bookstore. We'll put a link in the show notes and you can follow along with us while we do this.
Yeah, and you can follow her on Instagram. That's where I first kind of met her.
Oh, okay.
And she just puts up great things every day that are kind of counseling tips. And she started talking about her book, and then I got it, and I started noticing all these other people were saying, "Hey, I'm reading this great book." So I did let the author know we were reading the book on the podcast.
Awesome.
And she said, "Great, I can't wait to hear what you think about it."
Oh, good. Okay. Well, you can not only find Nicole on Instagram, but you can also find us on Instagram at Midlife Matters Podcast, or you can email us at midlifematterspodcast@gmail.com. We would love to hear your thoughts about this book or about anything that we've talked about today. How we all have a little bit of a tendency to kind of catastrophize and dread, and we really do want to start thinking in terms of what if it's wonderful. All right, Julie, Mindy, I enjoyed this discussion, and I look forward to reading the next chapter and talking with you about this next month.
Yeah, I'm excited about it.
Me too, and also nervous.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll talk to you about something different next week.
All right.
Okay.
Bye.
All right. Bye. Listeners, we want to invite you to our upcoming meet and greet event. If you are in or near LaGrange, Georgia, we would love for you to join us. This fun morning will take place on September 27th from 9 to 11 a.m. For more details, please message us on Instagram at Midlife Matters Podcast or drop us an email at midlifematterspodcast@gmail.com. Hope to see you there.